Okay, so welcome everybody to our Always Less to Do Than You Think series. We're doing a number of calls in this series with just some of the teachers that I have spent time learning from over the last three to 4 years, and the people who've really, I've had real insights in their presence. And I wanted to share those speakers with you, which is why we're doing this series. And Elsie, I don't know if I explained the background to you, but I've been running this group for a couple of years, and one of the conclusions that we always seem to come to at the end of each call is like, there is always so much less to do than you think. And that was kind of where these calls originated from, that kind of theme. But it's been fascinating because each of the speakers has been talking about a kind of a different angle and a different way that they, what that sentence kind of means to them in all sorts of practical ways or, insightful ways. So it's been a really interesting to have everybody talking on the same theme. But I'll just do a quick intro to Elsie, and then I want to hand over to her. So I just want to make sure everybody's muted. Here we go. Oh, I think. Linda, if you could mute yourself, because I can't seem to mute you for some reason. Oh no, they are, you're muted. So Elsie, I've been kicking myself because I haven't had the chance to meet Elsie in person. And Elsie, you won't be aware of this, but one of the reasons, and don't tell Michael I said this, but one of the reasons I signed up on Supercoach Academy to do the advanced track was because I knew you were speaking for the final weekend.
Wow.
And so I signed up to the program and I was all very excited about it, bought my ticket to come to LA. And then circumstances all changed over the summer. My kids started a new school on the same day that I was supposed to be flying to LA, so I had to be here. But I watched on the live stream as the event was taking place. And I was now I'm attuned to it, so I hear it a lot, but the word simplicity kept coming out of your mouth over and over again. And you probably weren't even aware of it, but I kind of picked up on it. And the way that you were describing the principles and what you'd seen as a result of the principles and how you help other people just had such inherent simplicity in it. It was beautiful. It really touched me. And I wrote to you, like, as I was watching those, saying, oh, Elsie, please come and speak on this, because I don't think people can kind of share it in the way that you do. Or certainly I wish that I could. And so I'm not going to say any more than that because I want to keep the time for you. These guys have heard enough of me over the last few weeks. And so I want to hand over to you just to, I don't know, just your take on the simplicity behind the principles. Sometimes we can make it all seem so complicated.
Right.
So anything you've got to kick off with that, and then of course we'll all be happy to ask you questions. And
okay. First of all, I'm delighted to meet you in person as well, Nick. I was delighted to get your email a couple of months or 4 months ago, whenever it was, and was touched by your comments. And so it's wonderful to actually meet you in person. And I hope to meet you one day in London, perhaps at the Innate Health Conference in May.
Definitely. And
I'm really pleased to be able to talk with you all. And I like that it's a small, intimate group because we can all just get to be friends really quickly and have a conversation. I feel loaded for bear in a way because I have a client here who arrived yesterday. And so we've had some incredible conversations, very similar to how you started off, Nick, about the simplicity of the principles and the deep feeling that accompanies our learning about the principles and about who we are at our core. And for me, it's always been about the feeling. I didn't know that's what it was, but when I first started my journey, I was not a fan of the principles. I was very resistant to this understanding. I was so lodged in my world of ain't it awful that, and so was my friend, Sydney Banks. He and his wife and my husband and myself were very drawn by insecurity, and we got along very well, sharing our misery. And the foundation of our relationship was poor me. So we got along like a house on fire. And then what happened was Sid had a profound experience that revealed to him that everybody has innate mental health. And he always talked about mind, consciousness, and thought, but he didn't actually talk about them as principles until the psychologist came along and heard him and heard their own voice, their own wisdom. And they then said to him, Sid, what you're talking about is foundational. And as you talk about how we have the power to create our experience in life, and that we're born mentally healthy, it sounds to us like these are principles that apply to all of humanity. And Sid said, yes, that's what I'm saying, that we're all the same underneath our various disguises, that we all are born with innate mental health. Now, for me, when I heard him talking like that, after enjoying our friendship of insecurity, and now all of a sudden he's this happy-go-lucky guy, and there was something about him. He had presence. Like before, when he was insecure, he'd walk around kind of bent over as if he had, I've said this before, but the analogy or the metaphor is so appropriate. He walked around as if he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. And after his experience, when he came to visit Ken and I with his wife, it was like this new person walked in. And he stood differently. His face was different. And you will have seen this amongst yourselves too, as you've started to change in your understanding of who you are at the core and kind of how life works. You'll have started to see the stress leave your face. And what I saw with Sid, because of the profundity of his experience, was he looked like 20 years younger. And there was a vibrancy and aliveness in him that drew me. But then he started to talk about what he'd experienced, and that's when I went like, whoa, that's just nonsense. That makes no sense to me, whatever. And this carried on for a year and a half, where he continued to grow into what he'd experienced. He continued to evolve. He continued to stay happy. So there was a consistency in him that I'd never seen in anybody before. I'd never really met anybody that was a really happy person most of the time. I certainly wasn't like that. My family wasn't like that. I occasionally felt some well-being when I was out in nature and my kids were really behaving well and Ken was behaving well. But my happiness was conditional. It was conditional on the circumstances that surrounded me or not. And to see Sid consistently happy was a novel thing for me. So on one hand, I was drawn to that feeling of well-being, and I also would experience it when I was with him until he started to talk about what he had discovered. And then I just would pull back again. So I had this kind of love-hate relationship with him, where I wanted to hang out with him, as did my husband, so long as he wouldn't talk about this nonsense. And I would put it to him like that. Sid, we'd love to have you and your wife join us for dinner on the condition that you don't talk about this stuff. And he'd just smile, and he'd have a twinkle in his eye, and he'd say, okay, dearie, sure, And that was new, that he wouldn't argue with me, that he would just honor and respect where I was coming from. But what was annoying about that is that he would twinkle at me. And when I would get annoyed and challenge him, he would twinkle at me even more. That was very disturbing to me, because in the past, it's not that we would have arguments. I would class them more as debates. I would share my point of view and he would share his point of view. This was before he had his experience, and we'd have a back and forth, So it wasn't like it was nasty or anything. But he wasn't in a debating mood. It's like he knew what he found, and he wasn't going to come away from that. He was consistent in his knowledge, in his knowing. And his knowing is what I took as arrogance, because I'd never experienced certainty before. So to me, it appeared when he said so confidently, we're all the same. He would say, you don't have to understand the principles, Elsie, in order to have them working for you. You are the principles in action. And I go, Sid, get real. If I have the power to create my experience in life, do you think I'd be creating this mess that I'm in? Do you think I'd be creating my anxiety? Give me a break. And he'd say, you are. It's how you use thought, the principle of thought. When you have anxious thoughts and you continue to dwell on them, that brings about a feeling of insecurity. That's no way, Sid. That's too easy. That's too simple. I know different. I know that my insecurity and my happiness comes from the fact that I only finished grade 12 and I never got to go to university. I married at the age of 17 and felt trapped by children arriving early and trapped by my marriage. That's not thought. That's real. Those are the circumstances I'm in. I don't have much money. We're eating a lot of rice and beans. That's real, Sid. Don't give me this nonsense about it's me creating this. And he'd say, dearie, it's the way you think about your circumstances. Over my head. Didn't get it. And towards the end of this year and a half of resistance, although I kept wanting to be near that feeling of well-being, his peace and his calmness, when I was with him, I would join it. But I didn't know that was me. I thought it was, again, circumstantial. I thought it was because I'm with this man and he seems to be enjoying life, and that's why I'm feeling good. And indeed, he would say to me, Elsie, it's not about me. You're feeling happy because of you. That's your true nature coming out in these times. It's not about me, it's about you. I couldn't buy it. Because when I'd leave him, chances are I would get back into my old environment, my old habitual thinking, and I'd get back into, ain't it awful? And then came the day where I just was feeling so out of sorts. I felt like my world was crumbling around me because I just couldn't get to Sid anymore, like my challenges were just being met with a twinkle in his eye. We're being met with this unconditional love. And that bothered me. But it stirred my world. It was awakening my true nature, my true self, whatever you want to call it. It was stirring something deeper, despite my intellectual angst and my personal thinking. I saw them driving up the driveway, Sid and his wife, and I thought, oh my word. Some of you may have heard this story on YouTube, I don't know. but I'm going to take the liberty of sharing it again, because when I saw them driving up the driveway, I just was horrified. I was in such a bad mood that I couldn't bear to see them. And so I hid. And the only place I could hide was in the bathroom, because we had like an open concept home where you would just walk in the door and there was no place to hide. And so that's how great my fear and resistance was I hid in the bathroom. And they knocked on the door and then walked in. And I'm just yearning for them to go away. You know, I'm just sitting in there hiding and thinking, oh, go away, go away. And then I heard the door close. And I thought, oh, thank God, they're gone. And then something compelled me out of that bathroom to go and open the door and to beckon them back into my home. I don't know. You know, I questioned that for a long time. What was it that moved me out of that bathroom without thought? There was just this doing without doing. And I beckoned them in, but I couldn't invite them to sit down. I turned around to put the kettle on the stove, but I didn't turn on the stove. And Sid said something very profound to me. Of course, he saw the fear that I was in. And he put his arm around my shoulders and he said, you know, dearie, you'll be okay. He said, you have God within you, just like everybody does on this planet. Now, that sounds like a nice phrase, but to me, that was like the last straw. How dare he? How does he know that? How can he say I have God within me? He doesn't know what God is. Even though he had said to Ken and I, after he had his profound experience, I know what God is, and it's not what you think it is. And that was very disturbing to me because of my religious background and because I had beliefs about what God was and wasn't. And he said, it's this spiritual, formless energy that we're made of. It's behind the physical body. It's what really is our source inside of us. We all are part of that. And if we're part of that, in reality, there's no separation. And I remember at another time, he actually said, it's that old phrase, you know, if you're like a drop in the ocean, you have the power of the ocean. He used that as an analogy. That made no sense to me either. But as time passed on, you know, I did understand that more. Nonetheless, when he said that beautiful couple of sentences to me, I couldn't stand them to be in my home. And I didn't push them out, but I opened the door behind them, you know, so the message was pretty clear. And they honored that. Again, you know, they honored that. And they got in their car and drove away. And I thought, that's it. That's the end of our friendship. I never want to see that couple again. And I got on the phone to a mutual friend of ours, Sid and his wife and Ken and myself. And our usual pattern of conversation was to voice the latest nonsense Sid had shared with us. And we would badmouth him behind his back. We'd say, you know, do you know what he said about thought the other day? He said, we create our experience in life. Did you ever hear such nonsense? And then she would go on and we'd go back and forth like that. Well, this time I'm just almost foaming at the mouth, saying to her, you know what he said to me this time? And she just listened. For the first time in a year of conversation with each other, She did not engage in that way. She just listened. And she finally said, Elsie, I've never heard you like this. I've never heard you so enraged. You should really listen to yourself. And again, I was utterly offended. And I just slammed the phone. I hung up on her. I didn't say goodbye or up your nose with a rubber hose. I just hung up on her. And that was it. And I thought, okay, I've marked Sid in my black book. He's out of my life. And now this friend is out of my life as well. Because that's what I used to do. I had a very thick black book with people that used to be my friend and were no longer my friends because they didn't agree with me. And something happened, like I'm still raging about my friend now as well as Sid. And I had a split second of clarity. And here's the simplicity, that despite my anger, despite all that personal thinking churning in my mind, my true nature came through. Wisdom spoke to me and said, thought creates feeling. That's what I heard. And I was so moved by that insight that I wept. Because what that brought to the table for me was, there is an answer. It showed me that there was something inside of myself, that there was wisdom inside of myself. I'd never experienced my own wisdom that I realized. When I look back, again, as time went on, I realized there were times, not that I can say I had an insight, but there were times where I experienced well-being and peace of mind that weren't conditional, and oftentimes it would be when I was on my own as a child, just playing by myself in nature, and I would be content. I'd be at peace just because. But I didn't know that that was a deep feeling, and that deep feeling of well-being is an expression of our true nature. It's an expression of who we are on the inside. I didn't know that. I experienced it, but I didn't know what it was, other than to enjoy the experience. And in that moment of insight, thought creates feeling, I felt a sense of worthiness. And again, because I had a lot of insecurity, so I didn't feel worthy. Who am I to feel worthy when I'm so insecure and so lost in my life? It would make sense, right? If you're feeling insecure and lost in life, then you're unworthy. That was my rationale. And so I just kind of sat in that beautiful feeling of wonder. And then shortly the kids came home from school, and I knew that I wanted to call Sid and let him know that what I'd seen, that I'd had that moment of insight. But they had to take a ferry and so on. It was going to be a bit of time before they got home. And when my kids came home on the school bus and walked in the door, I just saw them with new eyes, because so much personal thinking and rage and anger and poor me had just slipped away with that realization, thought creates feeling. And I saw my children with more love than I'd ever felt before, where I wasn't looking at them. Wipe your boots, hang up your coat, don't throw it on the floor, clean out your lunch lunch kit. Don't leave it for me to clean up. I went over and picked up their jacket and hung it up. I cleaned out their lunch kit and gave them a cookie, maybe even two. It was like I was filled with new feeling of love for them because it wasn't being covered up by all my conditioned thinking that you have to be good in order to get a cookie. And so I was teaching them conditional love just like I'd been taught. And so as time went on, I began to see more and more that what Sid had said early on, that we're all the principles in action. We are mind. We are consciousness. We are thought in action. They're always at work within us. I used to think for a long time that the principles were at work only when they were creating niceness, well-being. And then when they weren't, it was like, okay, I'm back in my personal thinking, and that's what's wrong. And then I began to realize little by little that this energy of thought and our ability as humans to create is at work to create good and bad, pleasant and unpleasant, because we're thought in action. We are creating in the moment. And that was so helpful because, again, it brought the power more, it brought it home. I realized I was always at home, no matter what. And so when I was feeling anger or judgment or blame, instead of blaming other people, I was able to see, okay, I'm just using thought in an unhealthy way, period. And I wouldn't go, why? Because as soon as I would voice that question, why, I began to see that was very seductive. And I'd get even more caught up in the whys, in the content of thought. And I began to have a fresh appreciation for consciousness. That consciousness was allowing me to see thought in all its manifestations and to see that it was me using thought in all those ways. So consciousness became more alive for me. I could see kind of the activity of consciousness. And I began to be grateful that I could see what was going on instead of like not seeing it and only seeing, oh, I'm thinking this way again, I'm stressed and all that, and so I blame myself. I should know better. I began to see, but at least I'm seeing it. And that allowed me to come out of it quicker. Because as soon as you see it, you're out of the personal thinking. At least to a degree. There are times where I see it to a degree, and I may still be experiencing some stress, but it's not as intense, and it doesn't last as long. And I'm grateful that at least I see it, that I'm not a victim of my thinking, that I'm still more in the driver's seat. And the fact is that the more you get the feeling of your true nature, the more you reside there, the more you're at home, residing in wisdom. It's not like wisdom has got your back It's better than that. You're your back, your wisdom in action. You're your best friend. Because if wisdom's got your back, it's like you're still kind of dependent and you're putting it outside of yourself. And here's where the simplicity comes back again, that you're always at home, no matter what. So you're acting out, so say you're at the kind of periphery of your wisdom. You're still at home. That was very, very comforting to me when I realized that. It's like, no matter what I do, I've got my back. I am mind. You are mind. I am consciousness. You are consciousness. I am thought. You are thought. See, I can see just by your faces that you're definitely considering this. Some of you are experiencing this, have experienced this. So you know what I'm talking about. And so this is where I'm going to pause, because I'd love some feedback.
Thank you, Elsie. That was lovely. And one of the things guys, wave at me if you've got a question. There's just one thing I wanted to say, Elsie, first, was that I love what you pointed to about the fact that even though you were in a rage, that wisdom could come through. Because I think, me and in this group as well, quite often we have conversations about, well, I need to quiet down in order to be able to understand the principles. Like, my mind's too busy, there's too much noise. I need to do that first. I need to work on that first, and then I might be able to understand the principles. And what I love is time and time again, we hear stories of Kathy Casey, of you, of Christine Heath, who are like so not interested in the principles and like quite resistant to it. And then suddenly hearing something despite yourselves.
Yes.
Not because you were trying really hard to hear and then you heard something, or that you worked on quietening down, or even that you were in a really lovely quiet space and then you heard something, which some of the other teachers do share their stories in that way. But it's like, it's there all the time. It's accessible all the time. And I love that. It's like you can take off your plate having to quieten down as a thing to do.
That's right. That's right. And that is a point we tried our best to make clear when George Pransky and I pulled together this paper called Sharing the Principles. And we based it as best as we could as the early pioneers in this understanding on what Sid had taught us, his primary teaching points. And we worked with a number of colleagues, again, kind of that are considered the early pioneers in this Three Principles community. And we would send out the paper to people. And we started off with 5 points and then sent it out to this group. And it grew to be about 12 or 13. And one of the points was, it's definitely helpful if you have a quiet mind, to kind of welcome insight from the inside out. But I love the cat on your back. That's very cool and very calm. Yeah. But it's not necessary. You can get insight anytime, any place, any situation. Again, and that's the beauty, as you say, Nick, that knowing we're home. And how could that happen despite ourselves if that information, if that true knowledge wasn't already there within us? Because all the time Sid shared with me, and I must say that it was that I would voice something to him, I would voice a question to him despite myself, because I didn't want to hear. And yet I'd find that something he had said in a previous conversation attracted my interest. And so I'd pose a question to him, and then he'd answer it, and I'd get angry with him. Like, Sid, I asked you not to talk about this. And he'd say, well, dearie, you asked me, And so it was like the question would come out despite myself. And so that we clarified that in these primary teaching points, that it's lovely when you are quiet and insight comes that way, and it's certainly conducive to insight. But the beauty, the wonder is that it will come out when it's meant to come out. And the interesting thing about that is when it came out for me, despite my rage and anger, when Sid and his wife were leaving my driveway, driving home, Barb said to him, I guess that's the last time we'll see Elsie, right? I guess that's the end of our friendship. And Sid said to Barb, no, pet, she heard something today. And Barb said, she did? Wow, she sure has a funny way of showing it. You know, I mean, she just about booted us out the door. And so he knew I'd heard something, even though I was frightened and fearful. And oh my God, I can't imagine the look on my face. And yet he knew I'd heard something. And this is what happens with us. You know, the more we live in our true nature, it's that feeling of well-being that comes out and touches people more than what we say to them. And that's another thing. So often in the Three Principles community, people misunderstand the word grounding. And they think that grounding means our ability to articulate the principles, you know, when we're sharing with groups or other people. And so often we don't understand the principles. We may get a sense of them, or we may understand, as I did, I got an insight about the principle of thought. And that was the only thing I could share when I started to share with people, was that one thing. I couldn't talk about mind, I couldn't talk about consciousness, but my knowing about thought took me a long way, because there's the feeling of certainty that disturbed me about Sid. But I began to have that certainty about thought, because I knew it, I experienced it. I saw the results of that, that when I thought in a certain way, that was what my experience was. When I had a shift and my thinking was elevated, that was my experience. And I began to see kind of the engineering, the workings of the principles. But to explain them, it still took a long time. And I remember Sid saying, it's not necessary to understand the principles in order to get it. And what I take to mean by getting it, my understanding of that phrase is the feeling. Because he always talked about the feeling. You know, he would say in all his conferences and public talks and privately, if you get a feeling, if you're enjoying this, you're getting it. Because he'd say, you can't understand these principles because they're of a spiritual nature. And so it's impossible to understand this with your intellect. It's about the feeling. And this deep feeling that kind of wells up inside you, and you feel all is right with the world, and you feel comfortable in yourself, you feel gratitude. That's it. And that's what the world is hungry for. So whatever human endeavor I've gone into, whether it's the corporate world, whether it's juvenile justice, whether it's inner city communities, the mental health field, talking with mental health workers and aid workers, it's the feeling I'm coming from that helps settle them down and opens their own ears to their own wisdom, even when they're confused. Okay, so give me some feedback on that. What's been your experience with that? Like, as you've shared with those you know, and I don't know your backgrounds or, you know, if you're coaches or what you're in, but I suspect you are sharing this understanding in some capacity, whether it's with your family. What's your experience of that sharing and what really touches people?
So you can wave at me, or you can click, I think, at the bottom of the screen to raise your hand. So who's going to share? Donna, I'm going to come to you. Oh, Sarah, I'm going to come to you. Donna, you're off the hook, but I will come back to you. Just because I know we've been talking recently about how you're sharing without actually teaching the principles. You know, but Sarah, I'm going to come to you first because you kindly put your hand up there.
I can't stand it when nobody volunteers. I'll do it.
Go on then.
Well, I put something in the group today. I've been having quite a... Just let me shut the door because my kids can hear me.
Let's do that if you're about to talk about them.
Yes, I'm not talking about them actually. They're talking about me, but then they'll worry. I've just got quite a few things going on at the moment that are potentially quite major things. And I'm just so calm about it all. Now, you don't know me, but I promise you, calm is not my usual state. I exist not in an hysterical state, but a state of high energy most of the time. I'm known as a very bouncy, bright, sparkly, energetic, moving around all over the place kind of a thing. And I'm still like that as a person, but inside, I'm really calm. Really calm. So calm, in fact, that I'm wondering what the hell's going on. Like, why am I taking... There's a lot of stuff going on, and I'm going, okay, that's something else. Okay, well, I'll file that one and I'll think about that one. It's like Scarlet, you know, I'll think about that one tomorrow. Can't deal with that at the moment. But it's things that would have got me in a right old flat. And kind of trying to get my kids to think about things and going, well, you know, you don't have to react. Haha, I've got 2 teenagers. Oh, they do have to react. And so I'm trying to get my family to I don't even know what I'm saying really, because it's very hard to articulate, isn't it?
Yes.
I have this very placid core that I've never had before. I can't find any other way of saying it. I'm going to stop now because I'm waffling.
I love that.
Thanks on there, Nick.
I love that. And when you say, Sarah, that I don't know what the heck is going on, you tell us, what is that calmness?
There's no point flapping. There's no point getting caught up in the thought of it, in the process of thinking about it, in the losing sleep about it thing, which is what I would routinely do. I would lie awake at 3 o'clock in the morning going, oh, I need to sort it out. I need to intellectualize it and make lists and all of those things. And I'm thinking, well, none of that is going to affect these situations. So, okay.
And where is that coming from?
My coach, I was trying to explain this to my my coach, and she said, where do you feel it? And I said, I feel it here. What color is it? It's white. It's white and it's in my throat and it's calm. Where is it coming from? Well, it has to be coming from me, doesn't it?
Yes.
I'm doing this. I just don't know how I'm doing it. And it's actually much nicer than being awake at 3 o'clock in the morning and panicking about things and trying to control stuff that is so far out of my control that it's pointless.
See, it's you, it's your wisdom. This is what this conversation and this talk has been about, is to honor your wisdom. It's you. That's why I asked you that, because you're experiencing it. But the next step to deepen it even more and stay there longer is to acknowledge it, to honor that, yes, this is me, just as you said. This is me. This is my wisdom. That's beautiful.
It's just a very odd thing.
I know. It does. It takes, it takes some getting used to, but it's still, after this time, I've been a student of this understanding for 43, 44 years. Honestly, it's still, when I have this kind of conversation and this insightful sharing, it moves me. Like, it never gets old. It never gets stale. That's what insight is. It's always new. And so I love it. I love that. And I love to see people wake up to that and honor it in themselves. It's not pride, like, whoa, I'm so what? No, it's like, wow, like wonder. You said odd, yeah. It's wonder,
like inside me. It's like there's two of me, because there's this calm one, and then there's the real me, and it's like I quite like the calm one. She's nice.
Yeah, and that's our true nature, what I would call our true nature, that calm nature, always at home.
Mm.
Thank you for sharing that. That was wonderful, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. I've got a couple of questions, or a comment and a question, that have come through on the chat as well, as Donna's been racking her brains coming up with a question. So I'll just read these out so that people in the group can hear, and then maybe you can speak to that, Elsie, before we run out of time with you. So Lorca's saying, it's been a big lesson this year to understand that I don't have to go into a big new conversation knowing what I'm going to say. Being and listening have brought me into more conversations and contracts this year than I've ever had. The getting that I really have no idea what's going to happen in a conversation, and the letting go of controlling it, and to say, and what's going to come from it. So just kind of letting go of trying to pre-plan conversations. And then Linda is a different kind of question, but there's probably a theme between them. Linda's saying, what I encounter is that people often say, oh yes, I've heard about this before when I did my NLP course, mindfulness course, or when I was meditating. But they seem to be quite tense or stressed. They seem to come to me because they see some level of well-being they want for themselves. When I start talking about the principles, they seem to be resistant. Up till now, I just leave that with them, but I'd love to be able to say something that helps them let go of their resistance. Do you have any suggestions?
It's the feeling again. It's the feeling is the educator, bottom line. And for starters, when you're coming from that feeling, when you're just feeling calm and at home, like the first person said, I didn't get their name, but the first comment the person said about not having to plan your conversations. I don't have to plan my webinars or anything with my clients. I just show up, and the conversation, and your Don's nodding, is, it just unfolds in the moment. And there's an aliveness about that. There's a feeling that is stirred inside of you and those you're talking with. And that's the educator. So if you're sharing the principles with someone, the best you can do is to share from that feeling and to find a point of relevance. It may not always be that you introduce the principles right off, but find a way that is relevant to whoever you're talking with. Like, for example, when I was started off with my client yesterday, he's so captivated by his intellect, and he's brilliant. And so his intellect, he's been used to his intellect running his life very successfully. And yet when I see him, and the reason he's here is because his organization helps thousands and thousands and thousands of people around the world, people really in need. And he knows that there's something deeper than the intellect. He's felt it numerous times, but then he goes back into the intellect to figure it out. And so as I listened to him, relevance came in regard to he's not honoring his wisdom. He feels it for a moment, and then he zooms into the intellect, and the intellect tries to manage it and figure it out. So he can kind of categorically say, this is what I learned, and this is what it's going to do, and this is how it's going to roll out.
Nobody here does that.
And so that was then our focus was, tell me more about those moments you've had. And that then stilled his mind, because he went back into those moments. If we're going to go back into memory, if we're going to go back into the past, best to go to a nice thing, best to remember your insights, because that will stir you, and chances are it will release more. And so he settled down. And now today, this morning, he had some profound insights. And while he was sharing them with me, he went into but, because there's always a but, right? How that's so familiar. There's always but, and his intellect came in, and he stopped it. He stopped it in the moment. So he and I have not really talked about the principles per se, other than as briefly as what I said to you before, I am mind, you are mind, and so on. Which means I'm where the insights come from. Me, as Sarah said. And it's that big me, uppercase me, that talks through us when we just show up for a conversation or engage with someone that knows what's appropriate and what's relevant. And one of the things in talking with my client today is, although he believes, because he has a religious background, he believes he has a bit of God in him, or whatever you want to call it, universal mind, whatever, this source in him. It's a belief. It's not a knowing. Now, he got that. When he said that, he kind of stopped in his tracks and he said, but I just realized that's a belief. And we just stopped and were quiet. So I don't know if that is helpful in terms of, sometimes it's not always, teaching the principles formally, although often, I'll say, whenever I have gone into a new venue, again, whether it's been the corporate world or juvenile justice, I will spend a few minutes early on to share the principles as they are to me in that moment. And just briefly, I don't articulate a great deal, but I want to lay the foundation that these are the principles, that mind is the spiritual energy behind life, and where wisdom and insights are born. And we are mind. Consciousness is our ability to be aware of our experience. And even deeper than that it's to be aware of where our experience comes from. And to be aware of who and what we are at our core. And that, to be aware of who and what we are, to be conscious of who and what we are at our core. People hunger for that. They want to know they're more than their circumstances. They want to know they're more than their thinking. They want to know who they are at their core. And thought is our ability to create. That we live in the moment of creation.
Simple as that.
You feel that, eh? You get a feeling for that. And then I move on to whatever else would come out. So grounding is coming from that deep feeling and just living your life as best as you can. Being grateful. And I love that you're nodding your heads and smiling, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk with you all again, because I go there, you know, I feel that again, and it's such a privilege to be able to share, whether it's an hour or a days or a minute with somebody, where it's just a hug full of love for your neighbor. It's a beautiful, beautiful gift that we share. So, Nick, what do you think?
I don't really know how to follow that, Elsie.
What's that?
I don't really know how to follow that. There's nothing really to say to follow on from that.
Yeah.
It just, thank you so much for coming and sharing with everybody here.
My pleasure. And thank you again, Nick, for inviting me. And thank you all for sharing yourselves with me, even that it wasn't verbal. I feel you. I feel you.
I just want to say as well to people, if you know, if what Elsie said has touched you, then her books are wonderful. And Barb Patterson's actually done one of the calls in this series, and the book that you and Barb wrote together is just like, I mean, they're all great, but that one really touched me, I suppose, meeting Barb as well. So that's Nuggets of Wisdom. But if you look on Amazon, all Elsie's books are there, and they're just so beautifully and simply written as well. And Elsie, do you have a website where people can find out? Do you write or share? Like, what's your website?
My website is 3PhD, the number 3, phd.net. And I'm also on Facebook and Twitter. On Facebook, I do it through my business. So because I don't want a volume of friends, so I discovered through one of my young clients that I could do it through my business, and the business doesn't do friends, you know. So I think I have 4 friends personally, and sometimes, you know, because I had my name as well as 3PhD, 3 Principles for Human Development, on my Facebook. And I think people feel sorry for me from time to time because I only have 4 friends, and then I'll get volumes of people asking to be my friend, and I have to let them know to come to my business Facebook.
Yeah, so I'll make sure that I post the link to that in the group. So that's probably the best way for people to connect with you and just give you their feedback on what they've heard today and that kind of thing, Elsie.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
Well, thank you again so much. Really appreciate it. And thanks, guys, for coming along, and hope you've enjoyed Elsie as much as I have. Yeah.
Thank you,
care, guys. I'll speak to you later.
Bye.
Bye.